We now turn to the report number 1, items for decision. So I now move reception of that report and paragraph 4 on shared services with Richmond. An amendment to this paragraph has been circulated in the Chamber. Can I ask Councillors Osborne and Carpenter to now move and second their amendment? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move it formally for now.
Formally seconded.
Thank you. Osborne to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just clarify something came up earlier on? It was suggested in this chamber a little while ago that I had referred to the merger between Richmond and Wandsworth. I don't think I did. I think I've been careful not to do that. I certainly don't recall ever saying that. And if I did, let me be clear, it was a slip of the tongue, and I apologise for it because I understand very well what it is that's being proposed. We are proposing shared staffs and services between two sovereign boroughs in a way which does not preclude arrangements with other boroughs or other local authorities, for that matter. And indeed, I presage my speech with that because in some ways that's what's good about what's being proposed, but it's also in some ways what's bad about what's being proposed. We're dealing with rather a mixed situation here. Let me also say that over the years I have gotten used to the committee system in this council. I won't say I'm fond of it, but I've gotten used to it. And I appreciate very well that there is much that can be done at committee, much that can be examined, much that can be achieved at committee in this council. And nobody is suggesting in our amendment that we would not want the process that is being proposed to come to committee on a regular basis. However, the committees only go so far, and sometimes you need a bit more. Here we are faced with one of the most momentous decisions, in fact a series of momentous decisions that this council has ever taken. It is, of course, proposed that we merge services and staff only, but that could well be the first step in a process which, in theory, could call into question the whole existence of this borough and its relationship with other boroughs throughout London and beyond. And with this momentous series of decisions in the pipeline, what is our leader's response? He says, don't worry, it can all be discussed at committee and then go to full council. This gives rise to a number of questions. First of all, how do we involve in the detailed discussion backbench councillors from either party, even members of the cabinet, if they're not on the relevant committees? They come to full council and jostle for position to get involved in the debate there. Is that what's intended? There are councillors on both sides of this chamber that are questioning what is happening here in this proposal. Some of them from the Conservative group publicly being very negative about what is being proposed. Other councils have been through this process. How do we learn from them? How do we make sure that where they've got it wrong, where they've got it right, we learn best practice in this process? We discuss it at committee. Is that it? How do we examine experienced opinion from outside the council and take it as evidence in this process? Oh, we're going to talk about it at committee. There are staff in this council who are anxious about job losses. What are they going to get? An agenda item at committee? What if the public are concerned about the loss of democratic control in this process? Full consultation? Well, so far it's been wholly inadequate. That's going to go to committee. Can we expand this work with other boroughs? No. On the basis of the decision-making process so far, it'll be salted away and one day it'll come to committee. And so it goes on. More and more of it back to committee. Here we are on the brink of transformational change in local government. Some of it good, some of it bad, as I've said. And what does the leader propose? A discussion at committee, and that's all. as usual, a sluggish, a woefully unimaginative response to one of the biggest questions local government faces today. This is probably the last chance we will get to get a democratic grip on this process, on proper scrutiny, on political accountability. So for the sake of this council, for the sake of our residents, for the sake of all those desirable objectives, I urge you all to support this amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to propose an adjournment of the Council for 30 seconds in process of the cuts to the voluntary sector grants, please. Thank you.
Seconded?
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, officers, councillors and guests. The voluntary sector, third sector, big society, whatever you choose to call it, is something we here in the UK can be proud of, especially in Wandsworth, where we have many organisations that are valuable in bridging the gap between public and private and providing much needed help and support to the more vulnerable members of our community. We are concerned that in our borough, the voluntary sector is now meeting with substandard treatment. Under the 2014 Care Act, we know that the Council has new duties to provide services that prevent people needing ongoing care and support. However, we are all aware that the document leaked in May last year spoke of decommissioning voluntary sector services, and we fear that this is now happening under the disguise of improving efficiency. The proposed voluntary sector cuts amount to over £42,000 and sadly have not been well thought out. There was no discussion with the organisations concerned, and many such as Arthritis Care Wandsworth did not even hear of the proposals until they read the OSC committee paper last month. That, everyone must agree, is bad practice. It's extraordinary that since being pressed in the committee meeting a few weeks ago, £75,000 of government funding has suddenly appeared. I hope that Councillor Madden has realised an honest mistake has been made. The voluntary sector review, agreed by all over 2 years ago, has not been completed. This was due to evaluate the Council and the clinical commissioning group's funding of the voluntary sector. But unfortunately, the latest paper only deals with part of the adult care's funding and fails to include public health or the CCG funding as per the original remit. Sadly, it is clear that most of the voluntary sector did not know about the planned review. They have not been engaged in this important review of the complete funding arrangements provided by the Council and the CCG. And we know this because we have asked them. So if anything has changed between 6 o'clock this evening and now, as far as we last heard of it, not all of the organisations had been approached. Age UK Wandsworth, Mushkil Hassan and Generate say that the proposed cuts will significantly affect the number of people they can support. Also, 4 organisations offering group support to learning and physically disabled people will be forced to close. In the committee meeting, it was suggested that cutting the Age UK handyman service and shopping service would not be too detrimental. If elderly members of society are malnourished or sustain an injury due to something in their home not being fixed, imagine the knock-on impact and cost implications to an already stretched NHS. Surely this does then represent a preventative service. I have first-hand experience in my day job as an emergency physician of seeing such situations.
Mr. Mayor, could I possibly intervene?
It was also outlandishly suggested that charity bosses, if they really...
Would you mind if I just intervened?
I would mind. Sorry, I would mind. I'd like to continue. Thank you. It was also outlandishly suggested that charity bosses, if they really cared, would pay some of their salary to the organisation for whom they worked. This argument is fundamentally flawed. If the chief executive of Age UK paid out a portion of his salary to every local Age UK group, he would be working for free. Furthermore, respectfully, it's like saying that as we have a housing crisis in Wandsworth, the chief executive of Wandsworth Council should pay for some people's rents. We understand the need to prevent organisations receiving grants from more than one funding stream. Agreed. But for this, we do need a detailed review of funding by the 2 main commissioners, this being the Council and the CCG, as originally agreed. To be very clear, we do support efficiency of service, and we do back the comprehensive review. What we're calling for is a detailed examination of the proposals in keeping with the original agreed review and further consultation with the affected organisations and their users. When all is said and done, this is not about party politics. We're all here to provide. We are all here to provide the best possible service for the very people who trusted us and voted for us, which is the people of the Wandsworth community. Please, let's vote for the amendment. Thank you very much.
Councillor Madden, do you wish to reply?
I'm thoroughly confused, Mr. Mayor. I thought that only by the member's speech at the end, when initially she asked for adjournment of the council, and then she says, please vote for the motion. Is this a motion, or is this an adjournment of the council?
We're talking about an adjournment motion. As the adjournment motion is up there.
So
it's entirely up to you. Well,
the motion
I can't give it.
is that the council adjourns.
The motion now before the council is, sorry, may I read out the motion, please? The motion is that the council adjourns for a period of 30 seconds to draw attention to the proposals in respect of voluntary secretary grants. Councillor Madden, you can either respond to that or not, as you choose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important that I do put or make some points. Councillor Alan Khan makes a number of valuable... Sorry? Oh, okay. Councillor Dr. Mrs. Alan Khan.
That's a lot of titles, I realise, quite long.
Mr. Mayor, this matter has been rehearsed a number of times already in the Chamber this evening. It's been the subject of a number of questions, and it was well reviewed at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We have not at any time said that we're closing any services. We have consulted, and in response to the question from Councillor Thomas, I made it perfectly clear, and I have got the fact sheet here, if he wants to see it, about the conversations that were had with the 7 organisations which are particularly involved in the early stages of the review. Councillor Dr. Mrs. Alan Khan made reference to arthritis care.
Hear.
Arthritis Care is not one of the organisations at this stage which is being involved in the review. Although,
it is, it's closing.
We did agree that further consultation would take place with those organisations. Now, the early stages of the consultations have shown up a number of anomalies. The Thomas Pocklington Trust, which is one of the organisations concerned, has reserves of £168 million. Where's the Director of Finance? I hope, please, there's no truth that Mr. Buss is trying to ask them for a loan. Mushkil Hassan have reserves of £4.95 million with an annual income in excess of £1.5 million. I have personal experience of the charitable sector. Yesterday I was talking to the eminent head of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. We believe that there should be a ratio of volunteers to staff to qualify as a voluntary organisation, somewhere in the region of between 10 and 20. Now, Mushkil Hassan has 129 members of staff, and on that basis it'd be reasonable to expect that they have between 1,250 and 2,500 volunteers. They've got 21.
Intervention, Mr. Mayor.
No, not prepared to accept that. Generate have 73 members of staff, so a ratio of 750 to 1,500 volunteers. They have 3 volunteers. It's not all bad. Age UK has 1,900 members of staff and 34,000 volunteers, so that about fits in.
Hooray.
It is totally disingenuous to suggest that there's been no consultation. The officers, in response to the earlier question from Councillor Clay, have been working their socks off on this, and they've been in consultation with a number of organisations. We also need to make sure that the organisations are totally Wandsworth focused. One of them covers the boroughs of Bromley, Croydon, Lambeth, Merton, Southwark, so we're not sure how much of the money we give them is actually spent in Wandsworth. I am a great believer in the voluntary sector. I'm a great believer in volunteering. And somebody said to me once, just because volunteers aren't paid doesn't make them worthless. In fact, it makes them priceless. And I would, on the basis of that, and the consultations that have taken place with the various organisations, and the full awareness that Councillor Dr. Mrs. Allen Khan is aware of, having been, I think she's been less misled by some of her colleagues who are more experienced in the ways of how local authority works. And I'm not being sexist or anything, but having seen the cabal at the back of the council chamber between herself and the other two members of the Adult Care Services and Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'm quite convinced that the problem lies elsewhere, and I urge the council to reject this motion.
Well done, Councillor Madden,
All right, Council, we still have to take up the reference up motion, so we effectively have got two votes to take. The one that's on the agenda.
First, keep going.
The first is the adjournment motion, moved by Councillor Dr. Allen Khan. The second is the reference up, proposed by Councillor Thomas. So I suggest we take these both as separate votes.
First, the adjournment motion.
First, the adjournment
Point of order,
motion.
Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Is it in order to take a motion on another substantive motion when we are in the middle of debating a substantive motion, which is the one on Councillor Osborne's
yes, it is.
amendment?
I'm told it is.
Now before the council.
Right. Let me then put the first motion, which is the adjournment motion, and the motion now before the council is that the council adjourns for a period of 30 seconds to draw attention to the proposals in respect of voluntary sector grants. So those in favour of that adjournment motion. All right. Okay, guys? Yep, correct. Those against? The adjournment motion is therefore lost 16 to 34. Right. Now, the second motion is before the council is the reference up amendment proposed by Councillor Thomas and seconded by Councillor Dr. Allen Khan, as set out of pages 89 and 90 of the agenda concerning voluntary sector grants. So those for that reference up amendment.
This is for the reference up.
This is for the reference up amendment. Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, 16.
All right.
16.
And those against? The reference up amendment has been lost, also 1634.
Now we look to return to the debate, and you're calling.
Now we propose to return. I propose to return to the debate and invite Councillor Grimston to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm speaking. Going to have a word in the debate about the Councillor Osborne's amendment. Mr. Mayor, having thought to begin with that this would probably be an example of the council working over something as important like this together, I'm becoming increasingly worried about the direction things are going. Let me say, first of all, something which I hope is undisputed, and something which I entirely agree with the leader over, is the Hammersmith and Fulham and the Triborough issue is certainly a very important case for us to look at seriously. Because my interpretation of what went on there is that they did precisely what we in Wandsworth are in severe danger of doing. They made two assumptions, closely associated assumptions. The first of which was that as long as you are of the same political control, then there are no problems with something of this nature, and you don't have to involve the other parties and have a serious debate. And the second assumption was political control will never change in any of these three councils. Now, as we're aware, the electorate doesn't always play the game that we think they should as politicians, and having followed that route, which is desperately close to what I think we've heard Wandsworth is going to do, as soon as political control did happen, none of that preparatory work had been done, and that proposal collapsed immediately. Now, of course, in the two councils we're talking about here, they actually have very different political journeys at present. In Richmond, the majority group in Richmond in 2014 had its best election result since 1982, with the exception of 2006. In this council, it was the opposition that had its best results since 1986. It would be of extraordinary arrogance for anyone in this chamber to believe that change of political control will never happen, either in Wandsworth or in Richmond, in the case of the future. Earlier, I asked the leader if he'd care to make specific comment on what he made of Vale of Whitehorse and South Oxfordshire and Redditch Bromsgrove. I didn't get a clear answer on that, but the reason I raised those is that they are two examples of councils which have changed political control since they entered into merged services. In the case of Vale of Whitehorse and South Oxfordshire, they started off different colour and are now the same, whereas in Bromsgrove and Redditch, it's the other way round. Redditch changed from Conservative to Labour in the course of the process, and both of them survived. And alongside any visits to Hammersmith and Fulham, Chelsea and Westminster to find out how to disastrously go wrong, we ought to be going and talking to members in those authorities which got that right. Because that leads to the second point that I wish to make. I don't know what members' case work is like. Actually, I do, because I've seen the statistics. But by far the majority of our casework that we do as members is done through the Housing and Community Services Directorate. That directorate which looks after planning, which looks after leisure, which looks after parks and open spaces, looks after parking, waste collection, housing and so on. Well, the Housing and Community Services is Wandsworth District Council. Every one of those functions is a district council function, not an upper tier council in those areas where there are two tiers of local authorities. And the severe effect, or the most likely effect on us as members, will be the effect on officers working in those departments where there is a huge amount of evidence out there of when it works and when it doesn't. Officers having to get to know an entirely new council area, because whether they came from Richmond or in Wandsworth, quite patently, they know one patch, but they're going to have to spend, presumably, 2 or 3 years learning another patch. What implication does that have for us as members managing our casework? What implications does it have for us as members in our relationship with officers, recognising that senior officers will only be in this building for half of the week instead of the whole week that we have now? We don't have to do the Wandsworth way approach of all this, of assuming nobody out there has any experience that we could possibly learn from in Wandsworth. Because the exact opposite is the truth. It's precisely the district councils that we should be talking to, and it's precisely the members in those district councils that we as members should be talking to learn and understand this. Because one thing I do know about this, I only know one of the mergers, the Redditch-Bromsgrove one, in considerable detail, but I know a little bit about some of the others. One of the things I do know is that this is not just a managerial thing without any implications for the political establishment. This is something which profoundly affects our roles as members. We talk about the Wandsworth way, but let's not forget that Wandsworth way was just as much about the officer corps and how the officers did their job as it was about members. We will not have a single organisation that will both do the Wandsworth way and the Richmond way, by definition. And that's a set of implications that we need seriously to take into account. The sad thing is, I know through talking that there are a number of members of the majority group who exactly share this point of view and who exactly see the benefit of going out there and learning from people who have been through this process before. And I do hope that they will have the courage, in fact we've heard today, the leader has no say whatsoever over how members of the Conservative group behave. That is something which has seriously changed since I was a member of that group, I have to tell the House. But nonetheless, if that is
could you now
the case,
draw your
yes,
remarks to
indeed.
conclusion, please?
Yes, and I will. I'll come
Please.
up with this very final comment, which is this. We can't just do this in terms of what's interest of the political establishment of today, because this will affect many, many years. Well, Hammersmith and Fulham had an excuse. Nobody had done it before in London, so they could make that mistake. We will not have the excuse because we've seen how it failed and when it failed elsewhere in London, and we owe it to everybody in the future that we learn those lessons and any others which are available.
Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting that I was sort of just about getting a hang of what Councillor Osborne had said about this momentous decision we are about to make and how vital and how important it was until the circus intervened. It shows you the scale of importance that actually he attaches to it. I think nobody's done anything about this, but one of the difficulties about the party opposite, in particular Councillor Osborne, is this: I'm not sure he can actually deliver the outcome that he might promise. And I think that often is the case when it comes to how we are going to deliver discussions and debate. When the proposals to create a shared service arrangement with Richmond was first mooted and discussed in this chamber, the party opposite talked about, well, we wanted to do that, but you got the wrong partner here. It was a bit like after the ball, Douglas sisters complaining that they should have been chosen rather than the other ones. Because my point about why Richmond was that the bedrock of any relationship is trust, and I trust them, and I don't trust the others that they had suggested. That's fundamentally the case. Now, Councillor Grimston, in his point, talks about lessons from Hammersmith, which he thinks are right lessons to learn, but in fact the wrong conclusions to reach from those lessons. Because I take the view that the arrangements in Hammersmith and Fulham were overturned because of change of administration. I'm not suggesting that there will be never a change of administration in Richmond or in this borough. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am saying is that in order to start a journey and embed some change, you need to actually trust each other. And that's what I am saying why we are with Richmond. Of course, we remain sovereign authorities, and we can pull out at any time, change of political administration or not. The party opposite and Councillor Grimston talk about this idea that there are number of people with huge doubts about what we're doing and almost being muzzled by me and my colleagues is kind of odd, because I haven't heard anyone saying that they have huge reservations or that they've been muzzled. We've had adequate and several discussions. I'm touched by Councillor Osborne's desire to empower members of the cabinet and backbenchers on this side, but you know, they can speak for themselves, and they do. So you know, they have enough opportunities to discuss and comment on it. Mr. Mayor, what we have embarked on is a very workmanlike arrangement with the neighbouring borough to share staff and share service delivery. We are working at the proposals to deliver all that change, and each time we come to a conclusion on how it's going to happen, it will be debated at committee and in the council. And of course, I have said to Councillor Osborne in my letter to him that there would be opportunities for members to be briefed, both sides, on the details of things to happen. That's how things happen in most places, that if you need to be fully briefed, you will be fully briefed so that you are adequately able to contribute to discussion at committee and in this council. I fear that the party opposite, really having been spurned in their choice of partner, is trying to look for all sorts of reasons why this is not worthy. In fact, if it was that worthy, perhaps it would have been an earlier debate. But surely this is a manufactured slight, and that's what comes through.
Right. The matter now before the Council is the amendment proposed by Councillor Osborne and seconded by Councillor Carpenter to the recommendation in paragraph 4 of report number 1 concerning the proposed shared staffing arrangement with Richmond Council. So those in favour of the amendment, please show. And those against? The amendment is lost, 1732.
Now the motion.
I now put the substantive motion.
On the same numbers?
Oh, is that the same numbers in reverse? Yes? Thank you.
Is that agreed?
Is that agreed?
We better take that. We better take it again. We better take it again.
All right, we're going to take
on the substantive motion. On the substantive motion.
Those in favour, yes, Madame. Well,
I'm just waiting for the vote to end.
can we? Yeah, right. We want to take the vote again, and there'll be those on the substantive motion. All those in favour of the motion.
The original recommendation.
The original recommendation.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, so it's different. 13, so that's carried 32.
The motion is carried 32-16.